Hello again to all my favorite ghouls and ghosts, and welcome to another special Halloween cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. We've got 5 more Halloween tales to thrill and to chill, so let's get started. Our first story is one of my favorite kinds of stories. Kids telling tales around a campfire, or around a lantern in this case. But sometimes those tales get a little too real, and then we have to wonder who is really the focus of the story, the creature or the storyteller. So let's hear a story about the Tooth Man. They pulled him from the lake, and they say his skin was as blue as the ice on the water. They checked his pulse and found him stone cold dead. They loaded him into a wagon and took him into town, the body bouncing like a stone as they rode. Whenever it was the bumping stopped, none of them knew. But when they arrived in town, they found the back of the wagon empty. He had our full attention as the tale found its crescendo. They had lost the body somewhere, and when they told the sheriff, he made them go back the way they had come and look for it. No matter how much they looked or how far they went, they couldn't find the frozen body, and wouldn't until morning. The sound of a chip crunching in John's teeth sounded very loud in the space, but we all pushed it out of our mind as we listened. The sound of screams would wake the town as Judge Weller awoke to find the frozen body of his latest victim beside him in his bed. And when the police arrived, he gladly confessed to his crimes. Gabriel gasped when the final blow fell, but we shushed him as we listened. He thought of nothing else for the length of his stay in the county jail, likely thought of nothing else right up until the rope ended his life. But the stiff, frozen body of Taylor Williams that had found its way into his bed. We all sat back, sighing contentedly as we clapped softly. "That's a good one, Craig," I said, nodding appreciatively as the others congratulated him. It was Halloween, and as it was Craig's turn to host the Halloween sleepover, he'd been allowed to tell the first story, one of many, I was sure, that would be shared that night. Craig, Gabriel, John, and I had been friends since kindergarten. Our town isn't very large, maybe 25,000 people tops, and when we realized we only lived a few streets away from each other, it was a done deal that we would be friends for life. We spent our days riding bikes or playing video games or just enjoying each other's company, and we didn't see an end to those days anytime soon. As we got older, however, Craig and I developed what you might call a bit of a rivalry. Whether it was video games, Pokemon cards, bike races, or whatever we did, the two of us had to be the best in our friend group. We would do anything for each other, but it was accepted that our competitions often put us at odds. I was often the one to come out on top of these contests, and as such, Craig had begun to take them kind of seriously. Any opportunity to be the winner was a chance he took, and when he looked at me to follow his story with something better, I was ready and waiting. Well, this is one my dad told me about, and it gave me the chills. They say there's a guy who walks around Carter May Park after dark. He wears a hooded sweatshirt, and no one has seen his face and lived to describe it. He told me that everyone called the guy Mr. Toothman, and he was a local legend of sorts. Lots of people had seen him, but no one had ever gotten close enough to talk to him or to see his face. Craig pretended to yawn, but the others were enthralled. Gabriel was lying on his stomach, his eyes getting big as he balanced on his hand, and John was nodding his head as he sat with his mouth a little open. I could see the Jolly Rancher he had been about to cradle into his cheek as it threatened to slip out, but he seemed not to realize he was about to lose some of his hard-won candy to the carpet. Well, my dad and his friends decided that they wanted to be the first one to see this elusive Mr. Toothman and, see what he looked like. So they went to the park after dark and camped out near a spot he was said to stop at. Someone at the school had told him that Mr. Toothman would stop and feed the birds just after sunset, by the little fountain, and as they hid in a bush and waited for sunset, they all told stories of what he might look like. "I bet he's like a bat with pointy teeth and drool coming out of his mouth," said Dad's friend Randy. Craig tried to roll his eyes, but he was clearly as interested as the rest of my friends. None of them had heard this story before. None of them had any idea of the legendary creature that stalked the park. They had never heard of it, because I had never told it, and it was something I'd been saving for tonight. "I bet he looks like an alligator, and his face barely fits beneath his hood," said Teddy. Dad didn't speculate with them, but he kept watch on the bench. It got darker and darker, and the bugs tuned up as the crickets and the night birds began their song. He was supposed to show up right after dark. They'd been told so, and they believed so, but he still wasn't here, and the mosquitoes were beginning to bite. A dog barked outside, but none of them took notice. They were all too enthralled by the story to give it a thought. "I bet he looks like a monster from under the bed," Teddy said suddenly, "and when he gets you, he drags you into the dark and swallows you up whole." "I bet," said a cold, deep voice, "that he gobbles up naughty kids who are out past their bedtime." They turned, and there he was. His hood was down, but Dad said he couldn't see his face in the gloom. All three of them went tearing off as fast as they could, the Toothman right behind them. They ran for home as fast as they were able, his running steps right behind them. Dad said he was making a weird sucking noise, like he was trying to stop from drooling at the sight of such tasty flesh. They ran and ran, but when they got to Teddy's house, which was closer, they discovered that he wasn't with them. Gabriel gasped, but it was pretty expected. They told his parents that the Toothman had gotten him, but they never really believed them. The police were called, and when the boys told them that the Toothman had gotten Teddy, they didn't believe them either. The park was searched, but nothing was ever found. Teddy remains missing to this day, and you can still see the Toothman walking in the park sometimes. They say he still sits on the bench, feeding the night birds and waiting for his next victim to come wandering by. As I finished, the others clapped softly, telling me that it really was a great story. All but Craig, of course. "Yeah, it was okay. Kinda unbelievable, despite your best efforts, though." "Oh, it's real," I shot back, as I grabbed some candy from my nearby bag. "My dad said he was there. His friend Teddy was never seen again, and his other friend Randy moved away a few months later. His parents were afraid he might go missing too, and they sold their house and got out of town." Craig made a disbelieving noise. "Oh, come on. Like anyone would buy that. You made it all up. Just admit it." I glowered at him, my candy still half unrolled. "You calling my dad a liar? 'Cause he wouldn't lie about something like that." "All right then," said Craig. "Prove it." I looked at him skeptically. "How? Let's all go to Carter-May Park right now. It's right down the road from here, like a 10-minute walk. It's already 9 o'clock, so the Toothman should be there. We can see him and get home before my mom wakes up and comes to check on us." I started to decline, but why shouldn't we go? Never mind that we were 4 12-year-olds who were talking about going out well after dark. Never mind that we were children who were talking about going to find a creature that snatched children. It was Halloween, and tonight anything was possible. Why couldn't we go to the park and catch a glimpse of a real-life monster? Tonight was the night for seeing monsters, wasn't it? All right, Craig, let's go have a look then. He started to look a little skeptical, but then I crossed my arms and delivered the final blow. Come on, you aren't chicken, are you? That sealed it, and in about 5 minutes we were slipping out his garage and making our way down the sidewalk. The streets were empty, the kids inside asleep or counting their candies, and we had the world to ourselves, it seemed. The odd car rolled by to break that illusion now and then, but our only company on the sidewalk was the scuttle of trash or the flap of a bat in the slight wind. It was quiet, the night just beginning to stretch its fingers across the town, and as the moon hung high and pregnant over top of us, it seemed that anything, really, could be possible. The park was lit by intermittent light poles, and the islands of light were welcome reprieve in the murky blackness. We could see the hay sculptures that the town had erected in the park, remnants of its Halloween event earlier that week, and they seemed monstrous in the quiet night. The playground was still covered in the thick fake spider webs that the town had put there, and it all seemed very spooky to 4 kids out past curfew. We heard the fountain before we came upon it. It was sitting in an intersection of 3 light poles, and they cast an eerie light across the overlapping surface of the water. Coins gleamed within the belly of that fountain, and we had all glimpsed them greedily from time to time. As we got closer, we stopped at the sight of someone sitting on the edge of the fountain. He was hunched over, his chin against the back of his hand, and we crouched down as we tried to hide from him. My heart beat a little faster as my eyes bore into him. Was that the Toothman that my father had told us about? No way, Gabriel breathed, slouching behind a shrub as we stared at the man on the edge of the fountain. I guess you weren't making it up. Told you my dad wasn't a liar, I said. We stood there watching for a few moments, the fountain the only noise to be heard, before Craig said, Well, go see what he looks like then. What? I blinked. Go see what he looks like. If he's a monster, then we'll be the first ones to see his face. John and Gabriel nodded, liking the sound of this. Yeah, John chimed in. Otherwise, how do we know it's not just a homeless guy or something? You ever seen a homeless guy around here? I shot back. But Craig wouldn't be discouraged. Go over there and get a look, or I refuse to believe it's him. I tried to reason with them, but in the end, they wouldn't be swayed. So, I started out from the shrub we had all crouched behind, as slowly and quietly as I could. There was really no way to sneak up on him. The walkway is a straight shot to the fountain, and the figure was sitting on the rim of said fountain. He was gonna see me, no matter how I approached, so I just figured I'd move straight towards him. If it was the Toothman, I would have plenty of chances to see him and run. If it wasn't, then they would let me know, and I could feel silly about creeping up on someone in the middle of the night. The closer I got, however, the more my hackles went up. The guy wasn't moving, wasn't even breathing. The closer I got, the more the tension rose. I began to expect him to spring up and grab me, to leap up and run at me, and as 20 feet became 10, I could hear my teeth chattering. He just sat there, just leaned against his hands, and I wondered if he was trying to lure me in. I could see his hoodie now, the dark fabric covering his face, and I just knew that beneath it there'd be rows of teeth, or a slobbering mouth, or bug eyes, or... Hello? Are you okay? I asked, reaching out to touch his arm. I expected to be grabbed. I expected to be devoured. I did not expect him to fall backwards into the fountain with a loud splash. As the straw rose around his still unmoving form, I began to understand. As my friends ran up, asking what had happened, I realized that it had been a scarecrow the whole time. In fact, I could see a second one sitting on the other side of the fountain. My friends laughed as they saw it too, and we all felt silly about being scared of a dumb old scarecrow. Craig was laughing, the tension gone, and I remembered thinking how nice it was to see him just enjoying being my friend again. No rivalry, no challenge, just playing like we used to. When I saw something over his shoulder, however, I felt some of the mirth run out of me. Sitting on the bench across from the fountain, about 10 feet from our little group, was another figure sitting on a park bench. There was a bag in his hand, popcorn or seeds maybe, and it appeared that he was feeding the birds. It wasn't moving. It didn't even appear to be breathing. And it too was dressed in a black hoodie and ratty jeans. The shadowy hood was facing towards us, and the depths were dark enough that I couldn't make out anything within. Craig seemed to grasp that I was looking past him, and when he turned around, I heard him chuckle. Man, these things are everywhere. They probably won't mind if we push them over, right? They're just hay, and they're probably just going to be thrown out anyway. I wanted to stop him as he walked towards it, but John and Gabriel were already going to shove the other scarecrow in as it sat on the side of the fountain. They thought I had done it on purpose, thought I had realized that it wasn't real as I came up, and they wanted some Halloween mischief too. The tension was gone. It was all fun and games now, and I was the only one to see Craig as he approached the bench. "They look so real," I heard him half whisper. I could almost believe it was. The thing reached up and grabbed him just as the other scarecrow went into the fountain, and his screams of panic were lost amidst the splash. The hand holding the bag let it drop to the ground, and as Craig tried to pull away, I saw it rise slowly towards the hood. My other friends hadn't noticed yet. They were still too busy with the scarecrow as they pushed it into the fountain, and as much as I wanted to move my feet, they were frozen to the sidewalk. Craig was begging for help, screaming for his mother, and as the hood came down, I joined my scream of terror to his. They had named him aptly. His head was bald and pink, like the blobfish we'd made fun of in science class the year before. His nose was thick and squashy, and his eyes were like little pits in his oddly shaped face. His mouth took up the majority of that face, and it was horrible enough to make up for the rest. His teeth were like sewing needles, a double row of sharp, steely gray fangs, and when he opened his jaws, it looked like he could swallow Craig whole. Craig stopped screaming when that mouth fell over his face, and that's when John and Gabriel figured out that something else was going on. We ran like frightened rabbits, our minds commanding us to get as far from the danger as we could, and I'm ashamed to say that we left Craig behind. There was nothing we could do for him anymore. Craig's mom answered the door after about 5 minutes of pounding and screaming. She came fully awake when we started trying to tell her what had happened. The cops came in a hurry when she called them, and we took them to the spot where he'd been attacked. There was no sign of Craig or the man, but there was enough blood to prove that something had happened here. It stained the pavement and the bench, and the city would spend days afterwards trying to get it off. We were all taken to the station so we could give our statements, and when I told them what my dad had told me about the Toothman, they brought him in too. Dad was still in his pajamas, pale and scared and unsure of what was going on, and he hugged me when he saw me. He and my mom had been in the lobby of the police station for a while, and they had told them very little about what had happened. They were worried that I had been hurt or even killed, and seeing me sent relief washing through him. That relief was smothered when I told him that we had seen the Toothman. What? The Toothman? The one from your story? The one who took Teddy, remember? Dad looked confused. That's impossible, kiddo. No, I said, we saw him. He had a black hoodie that covered his face, and he was on the bench beside the fountain. Craig thought he was a scarecrow, and he went to push him over, and that's when it got him. It's the Toothman. You told me about him. You said it was just a story, buddy, he said, looking at the police as if begging them to believe him. I made it up. I never had a friend go missing. I just made up a scary story to tell you. There's no such thing as the Toothman. The police let us go not long after. I think about that Halloween a lot, especially around this time of year. Turns out that Craig had been right all along. My dad had been a liar. My dad had made up a story I told my friends. And if I hadn't told it, then we never would have been in that park that night. No one knows who or what took Craig, but like Randy from his story, his family moved away not long after. Other people have reported seeing a man in a black hoodie in the park at night, but the police have never been able to substantiate it. The park mostly stays empty now, and the people who use it are the kind who don't like to be disturbed. It's not a park you take your kids to anymore, and the town built a shiny new park not long after the incident. So if you see a man walking at night in a black hooded sweatshirt, steer clear of him. You never know when you might find yourself staring into the toothy maw of the Toothman. Makes you a little wary next time you approach what appears to be stationary Halloween decorations. Moving on, we have another creepy critter who hangs around right in plain view. Although he prefers to work by the light of the moon, he still invites people in one day a year to see his work. So, let's hear a story about Halloween at Bald-Who Manor. You see him? Clancy asked Roger. The two of them crouched behind the fence. Shut up, or he's gonna hear us, Roger hissed, pressing his eye to the splintery wood. It was after sunset, and if their mothers realized they weren't home yet, the boys would be in big trouble. They didn't care, though. They wanted to look at this mysterious fella who lived in the creepy old house at the end of the block. The one who only came out after dark. Thomas Bald-Who was known to almost everyone in Chambliss. It was a small town, a town built on coal and lumber, and the population was roughly 20,000. As such, the large and foreboding house at the end of Fortner Lane stood out like a sore thumb. In a town of mostly trailers and ranch homes, the house in question was Bald-Who Place, and it loomed like a gargoyle at the end of the cul-de-sac. No one knew how long it had been there, but some of the kids had seen a picture of the old manor in old paintings from the early days of the town. They say it had been occupied by the town's founder, and when he'd been arrested after a string of children had gone missing, someone new had taken up residence there. Someone who only came out after dark. The mob hadn't waited for justice to be served, it was said. They had dragged Thomas from his cell and beheaded him in the street, something that was the custom in certain places. Afterwards, the townspeople had wanted to go and see what sort of things the town founder had in his now empty home. But when the lights kept coming on and strange figures were seen around the grounds, they thought the magnificent manor might be haunted. They assumed it would eventually fall to pieces without someone to take care of it, but instead, the house remained, and even seemed to thrive under the care of whoever owned it. People had seen a shadowy figure making changes to the home for years, maintaining the grounds and fixing the damage to the ancient three-story, but no one had ever met him. That was 100 years ago, and as the town grew, the house remained as a mystery within Chambliss. No one in town still believed the house was haunted, but they knew someone was living there. Whoever they were extremely reclusive. When people came to the house, no one ever answered the door. If you approached the person while they were in the yard, they would always retreat inside. No one knew who they were or what relation they might be to the old founder. But they did know one thing about the owner of the house, and that was that he loved Halloween. The owner of the house may not be social the other 364 days of the year, but on Halloween, they threw the gates open and passed out the choicest candies and the best tricks. As the boys watched, the yard was already being prepared for the coming holiday. The front porch was festooned with pumpkins. The yard was set with gravestones and half-buried caskets, and the cobwebs and bats were thick in every tree. The trees in the yard always looked skeletal, despite how much attention was paid to the lawn, and they added to the aesthetic of the home. No one could be sure, but everyone was pretty sure the creepy nature of the homestead was intentional. The wood was dark, painted a deep brown, and stained like dark chocolate. The windows always glowed with something like candlelight, and the house just seemed to lean malevolently. Beyond those gates, it was Halloween every day for whoever happened to live there. "What's he doing?" Clancy asked. The crack he was peeking through wasn't very wide, and Roger had the better vantage point with the knothole. "He's filling orange bags with leaves for yard jack-o'-lanterns." "How does he see?" Clancy asked, the scritch-scratch of the man's rake constant as he collected up his medium. "Dunno. He doesn't even have the porch light on. Maybe he's raking by pumpkin light." Clancy wanted to look up over the fence, but he didn't dare. Both boys assumed the man would just leave if he thought they were watching, but you could never be sure. When Clancy's mother called his name, the boys stiffened like a goose had walked over their graves. They could see the person in the yard stiffen too, looking in the direction of the call as he turned to the fence. In the gathering shadows, they could see that he was dressed in jeans and a sweater, clothes that would look as acceptable for yard work as they would for a homeless man. The garments hung off of him, his body thin and emaciated, and people in town thought he might be sick. His voice, however, did not match his appearance. The voice everyone heard when they did business with him was rich, cultured, and full of vigor. Many of the women secretly held affection for him, saying his voice sounded like one of the men from the romance novel covers they all read, while their husbands were at work, of course. They would have to imagine what his face might look like, though, because he never came into town. He would call the local businesses and tell them he needed supplies delivered to the house about twice a year. Wood, decorations, candy, various and sundry things that he used to fix up the house or to get ready for the holidays. He never called the grocer or the butcher, however, and people weren't sure what he was eating up there. Whatever it was, it kept him going, and he continued to tirelessly work on the house and the grounds by moonlight. "Roger!" came the shrill cry from farther down the block. "Roger, it's past curfew, boy. You'd better get home before your dinner gets cold." "Crap," Roger said, taking his eyes off the yard as he turned back towards the house. "She sounds mad." "We better go," Clancy whispered, feeling very exposed by the pool of illumination from the street light overhead. "Yeah, might be a..." "Are you boys quite all right?" said a cultured voice from behind them. Both boys jumped like someone had lashed them with a belt. They looked back, shaking as the shadow of the stranger fell across them. In the gloom of the yard, he had appeared to be a large, thin man, but now he loomed over the boys like a giant from a fable. Both had barely gotten a good look at the stranger before the lamp overhead popped and left them standing in the gathering darkness. Both yelled in terror, scrambling away from the fence as they beat feet up the street for home, as startled by the lamp as the man. He watched them go, his face obscured by the gloom, except for his eyes. Both boys would swear later that they had seen 2 red flickers where his eyes should be. Both boys would also swear that his head had been a grinning skull until the day they died. "It was probably just a mask, Roger," Clancy said as they walked to school the next day. He could still feel the sting his dad had put into his bottom for being out past dark, and his mother had scolded him for bothering the nice man who lived at MissNewBooty Place. He's never hurt anyone, and he'll never feel like he can introduce himself to the neighborhood if you kids keep bothering him. She had colored a little as she said it, and some of the snap in his father's hand could have been because he'd noticed. Many of the men in town were hoping that the mysterious man would stay in his house and leave their wives to their daydreams. "Mask nothing," Roger said. "That was a skull with 2 red eyes. You and I both saw it." "I don't know," Clancy hedged, not wanting another whipping from his dad for bothering people. His dad had been passed up for another promotion at the paper mill, and he was ornery these days. His mom had tried to console him, saying he'd get it next time, but he'd been sitting in the den with a case of beer in a foul mood lately. "What I know is that someone with a skeleton for a head is living in our town, and we should let people know about it." "Yeah?" Clancy said skeptically. "How are we going to do that? Mr. MissNewBooty never comes out or lets people see him, so how are we going to do anything?" "Just so happens we don't need him to come out. In 2 nights, Mr. MissNewBooty will open his gates and let kids in to trick-or-treat. He always has a spooky display where he hides so he can give people a good scare. If we can get close, we can snap a picture and get proof. You still got that instant camera?" Clancy nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, but if I break it running away, my mom will literally kill me. It was a Christmas present." "We won't break it," Roger assured him. "Once we get proof, we'll be heroes. Imagine how cool we'll be if we snap a picture of the ghost that haunts MissNewBooty Place." Clancy thought about it, and as he thought of the kids at school chanting his name, he decided that it might be worth the risk. He and Roger would be legends, and a reputation like that could take them all the way to middle school. "What's your costume this year?" Roger asked, though it sounded like it didn't matter. "I got a cardboard box robot that I made last year," Clancy said. His dad had helped him make it last year, back when he was in a better mood, and Clancy had added a little more spray paint the following week. That had earned him a loud scolding from his dad, too. Apparently he had used the good spray paint and not the cheap crap that he had bought for him last year. Clancy had said he was sorry and finished up with the other can. It looked good now, and the thought that he might not wear it made him feel a little sad. It would surely be too small next year. "I got another ninja costume from my grandma. She gave it to me for my birthday last year. Mom bought me a new one without thinking about it, and if we go as ninjas, we can make a hasty retreat once we get the picture." The logic was sound to Clancy. Ninjas would be faster than a clunky box robot, and he agreed to meet at Roger's house on Friday night. "Bring your camera, and don't be late. I want to hit a few houses before we get to the big prize." It was edging up on 9 o'clock when the boys got to the gates of the MissNewBooty Place. A few houses had turned into a 3-hour tour of 6 different neighborhoods, and when Roger realized what time it was, he'd said a word that would have made Clancy's mom wash his mouth out with soap. The boys had run back to their neighborhood and left their candy at Roger's house before heading out again. Roger's mom had asked if they didn't have enough candy, but Roger said they had one more house to hit before they packed it in. "We got to get candy from the MissNewBooty Place. He always has the best treats in town." She had told them to be quick, and the 2 ninjas had headed back into the night. Now that they were standing here before the lair of the beast, Clancy was feeling a little unsure of the plan. Let's just go back, Roger. We've got enough candy. We don't really need to." But Roger stepped into the yard like he hadn't even heard him. Roger intended to get his treat this year. Clancy was left with no choice but to turn around or follow after, and his loyalty to his friend was too great to back out now. The yard was set up like a graveyard, and as they walked towards the house, Clancy jumped as a zombie lurched out of a coffin that had been set up next to the gate. He growled and roared before descending back down again to get ready for the next victim. Roger laughed as the kid in the ghost costume jumped in time with Clancy, glancing around to make sure that he was the last before proceeding. It was late now, and the boys were the last 2 left on the property. If they were going to make their move, now would be the time. They made their way up the sidewalk, graves erupting to reveal zombies or skeletons that popped out with a mechanical growling noise. He was really going all out this year, it seemed, and the boys expected a grave to contain the mysterious Mr. Baldahu at any minute. He would come stomping out, dressed as a skeleton or a zombie, and they could trick him into bending down so they could snatch his mask and reveal his face. Clancy was ready with his camera, and Roger had seen him snap several panic shots as they went. The closer they got to the house without encountering him, the more their nerves jangled. With every crackly mechanical growl and yowl that split the air, the boys' trepidation rose, and as they mounted the stairs to the house, they felt a cold chill run up their backs. They had come midway when the door to the house opened, revealing a rocking chair with a headless body seated in it. It held a bucket of candy in its lap, the chair creaking menacingly with every sway of the occupant. "Get the camera ready," Roger whispered, sneaking up to the chair. Clancy nodded, standing just inside the door as he tried to stop his knees from shaking. Roger came up to the bowl, his eyes boring into the headless thing as he reached into the mound of candy. He expected the jump, expected the scare, but he never expected the direction it might come from. Clancy watched through the little window, hands shaking as he waited to snap the picture. All at once, Roger shot his free hand for where the head should be on the rocker, trying to find its head. Should be right below the neckline, an easy grab, but as Roger patted the spot, he found it solid, crying out in pain as something took hold of his rooting hand. He had been so intent on the shoulders, he hadn't bothered to take his hand out of the candy bowl. Now, something had a hold of it, and Roger was afraid it would tear it off. "Clancy! Clancy, help me!" he yelled, but the door slammed shut then, sealing their fate. As the man stood up, Roger pulled his hand free of the bowl, and Clancy screamed in terror as the bloody skull chomped happily at it. It was an old skull, the bones red with blood, and the teeth were turning red as Roger's fingers were ground beneath them. Roger shook it only once, the pain too great to have it move much, and when the meaty snap washed over the boys, the skull hit the ground with nearly half the finger still in his mouth. Roger fled, pounding on the door as Clancy sputtered and cried for someone to help them. His camera flashed a few more times, but what it caught was anyone's guess. When the body bent down to get the head, tucking it under its arm, the skull seemed to tut as it worried down the finger into its non-existent throat. "Terribly sorry, boys. I know it's bad manners and a touch barbaric, but Bloody Bones here does love his treats on Halloween. I've had to limit him. Missing children do make such a fuss. But," the skull said, as its bones turned up abnormally, "Halloween is such a hectic time. Sometimes children go missing for one reason or another." The boys cowered as he came towards them, but their screams fell on deaf ears as Bloody Bones and Rawhead went about their business. The boys were searched for, but never found. The police came and searched Baldahu Place, but they never found the boys or its mysterious owner. Baldahu Place continues to stand to this day, and every Halloween there's a grand event with candy and decorations. Supplies are still delivered, the bills are always paid, and children sometimes go missing. No one could know that when the townspeople beheaded Thomas Baldahu, they would create a legacy that would outlast even the town. None of them could have known what they created with the swipe of a simple axe, or how it would haunt the town forevermore. My mother always told me never to go into someone's house for Halloween treats, and it seems she might have been right. Moving on, we have a sad little tale about loss around this time of year. So, let's hear a story about what lies just beyond the veil. Emily sighed as she stood in the doorway of her childhood home. She hadn't wanted to move home like this, but it seemed silly to leave the house empty after her father's death. When she opened the door, the familiar smells of childhood had assaulted her, bringing tears to her eyes as she remembered all the good times she'd had here. Christmas mornings, birthdays, nights spent on the couch as she and her dad watched whatever was on TV. The old place meant a lot to her, and she had hoped that something like this wouldn't happen for a good long time. Dad's dementia had taken him quickly, and the old house was all she had left now. Emily had lost her mother when she was young. In a way, that was a blessing. Emily had been too young to mourn her, or even to miss her, and her dad had filled the gap easily. He had never shied away from the tasks that he didn't know how to do, and to Emily, he had always been the best dad ever. When she'd gone to college the year before, she had worried about leaving him by himself, but he assured her that he could manage. When he'd gotten the diagnosis from his doctor the year before, he hadn't wanted to tell her at first. It was nothing for sure, he'd told her, and he'd have plenty of time left. Emily didn't need to worry about him, not when she had school to worry about. He downplayed it for 3 months, but Emily began to notice little changes in him that worried her. He couldn't remember what year it was sometimes. He forgot that he was retired now. He called her late sometimes, wanting to know why she wasn't home from school. It didn't come to a head, though, until the police called her after he'd tried to go to work one morning at an office his company no longer owned. Emily had taken a break from school, but his decline had become a free-fall. Gone was the loving man who had always been her strength and guidance. Her dad forgot who she was, calling her by her aunt's name more than hers, and fighting her over simple things as she tried to boss him around because she was older. Emily had been out grocery shopping when he had passed. In the end, dementia hadn't gotten him. He had hung himself in the living room for whatever reason, and the neighbors had called an ambulance when they saw him in the big bay window that looked out over the front lawn. Emily remembered that day as she took boxes out of her SUV. In retrospect, she should have known something was amiss. It was the first week of October, Dad's favorite month, and he had been doing a little better. He brightened up as they set up the Halloween decorations. Emily remembered him calling her kiddo again and ruffling her hair like he'd done when she was little. He'd been doing better. He'd seemed more lucid and more in the world. And on the day she'd gone out for groceries, he'd told her there was a program he wanted to watch and that he'd be okay. She thought about insisting, but decided it would probably be fine. She told him that she'd be right back, and when he told her that he loved her, she smiled for the first time in a while. When she'd gotten the call, she'd been unable to answer as she slid to the fetal position in the soup aisle of Publix. No one could have said why he had done it, but he was gone, all the same. Now she was left with nothing but a big empty house full of memories and questions. "Need a hand, Em?" Emily turned, knowing that voice. It was Glenn from across the street, and she shifted the box in her arms as she pointed back towards the SUV. Glenn was no spring chicken, but he gladly grabbed a couple of boxes and walked them into the house. "It's weird being in here without Frank," he commented, catching himself a moment later and apologizing. "I'm sorry, kiddo. I know that no one knows that better than you do." "It's okay," Emily said. He's at peace now. I know he hadn't been at peace for a while." Glenn set the box down in the living room, and as they went to get more, he commented that it was weird to see the yard so empty. I don't think I've ever seen it lacking its usual ghosts and ghouls this close to Halloween. Emily nodded. I know, but it seemed inappropriate to keep them up. She had taken them down the day of Dad's wake. Emily had returned from the wake, looked at all the tombstones and ghosts, and just couldn't take it anymore. She had taken it all down as the floodlights presided over the yard and just tossed it into the garage. If some of them broke, then that was just too bad. Emily had been happier for their passing once they had been put away, and she had gone to the funeral in a much better mood. Think you might put them up again before Halloween? Glenn asked. Maybe, Emily said, but in her mind, she doubted it. It was 9 days till Halloween, and the last thing on Emily's mind was decorating the yard for a bunch of kids. Emily thanked Glenn for his help, and as the door closed behind her, all she really wanted to do was sleep. Just the act of moving her things in with the intention of staying was more than she could bear. She decided that tomorrow she would start moving her dad's things into the garage and putting her own stuff in the house. It would be hard, but she knew that it would go miles to making her feel better about staying here full time. As she had moved boxes into the living room earlier, she had smelled the Old Spice that her dad had always worn, and kept catching hints of old cigar smoke from his recliner. They were comfortable smells, smells from her childhood, but now they only filled her with unsurmountable sadness. As she snugged down in the guest bedroom, the place she'd been sleeping since she'd come back to live here, she hoped it would be easier as she cleaned out the old house. She hoped that maybe there would be some answers somewhere amongst Dad's old things as well. Emily was packing things into a box when she heard the knock on the front door the next day. It had been a rough morning, but Emily felt like she was making progress. The living room had been packed into 2 kinds of boxes, keep and donate. Most of Dad's stuff was going to be donated, his knickknacks not really fitting in with her stuff. The Billy Bass, the fishing trophies, and the last of Mom's precious memories figurines had gone into the donation box, but the pictures and some of the other things were staying. They looked a little odd next to Emily's things, her Funkos clashing with Dad's ceramic ducks, but some of these things were such a huge part of her childhood that she couldn't bear to get rid of them. The mallard with the green stripe was the one that she had painted herself, the one they had painted together, and the transition between Emily's childhood paintings and Dad's smooth brushstrokes were evident. She had cried over that duck, the plaster threatening to shatter as she clutched it to her chest. The duck's fragility had been saved by the knock on the front door. It was Glenn again, and Emily remembered that he'd agreed to take some of the boxes to the Salvation Army for her. When she opened the door, however, she was surprised to see that the Halloween decorations were again set up in the yard. I'm glad to see you feeling better. I was surprised to see the yard set up again. Did you have a wild hare last night? Emily looked out at the yard, but as she shook her head, Glenn must have realized that this wasn't her doing. Weird thing for kids to do. Can't imagine anyone on the block would just break into your garage and set up your Halloween decorations. He took the boxes and said he'd bring her a receipt, and Emily thanked him as she closed the door. With the door between her and the real world, Emily felt herself give in to the creeping sense of trespass. The whole thing freaked Emily out. She assured herself that she was making too much out of it, but she knew that she wouldn't be comfortable until the decorations were put away again. She set aside her unpacking as she cleaned up the ghosts and the gravestones, putting them in the boxes as she slid them into the crawl space over the garage. She must have been more tired than she thought last night to miss someone moving around outside all night. As she closed the little door in the ceiling of the garage, she wondered if maybe she should call the police. They had technically broken into her garage, though Emily doubted if it had been locked in the first place. She decided to let it slide this time and go back to setting up the living room. It was getting late, and she knew that soon her thoughts would be on dinner. When someone knocked the next day, Emily looked up from her lunch and found Glenn on the front porch again. She'd been too busy to check the lawn this morning, going straight to work on the kitchen as she moved in her appliances. And as she saw the tombstones and the ghosts had returned to their usual spot, she felt the dread rising in her throat. She was absolutely going to call the police this time. She had locked the garage, locked the crawl space with the padlock her dad had always used. If the kids dragged them out this time, it would qualify as breaking and entering. Glenn smiled as she opened the door, but he looked uncomfortable this time as he stood wringing his hat in his hands. He looked like someone delivering bad news, and Emily wasn't sure how much more bad news she could handle. "Hey there, Em, just coming to make sure everything's okay." Emily thought about brushing him off, but decided to be truthful with him. "You know, Glenn, not really. Someone keeps breaking into my garage and setting up my Halloween decorations. I can keep a sense of humor about it, but it's getting harder and harder as time goes on." Glenn nodded. "I can imagine. I'll see if somebody has picked up anything on their cameras so we can see what's going on. Some of your neighbors, though, had mentioned something in the house. I know that people mourn in their own way, but just thought I'd make sure you were feeling okay." Emily gave him a questioning look as she grew tired of his beating around the bush. "Glenn, why don't you come out and say what's bothering you?" The old man looked a little offended, but he tried to brush off her briskness. "Someone said you had a silhouette in the front window of someone hanging. I like to think I know you better than that, but I know that grieving does weird things to people, and I just thought I'd come make sure you were okay." Emily gaped at him. "I can assure you, Glenn, I haven't had anything like that in my window. It's sick, and I would have thought you knew me better than that." Glenn and her father had been old friends since Dad had moved into the house, and Emily had grown up with Glenn's daughter and son. The families had been close, and Glenn had even come over to help her with her father a lot when he went downhill. For Glenn to ask her if she had done something like that was extremely hurtful, and he seemed a little more at ease by her answer. I told them they were wrong, but you wouldn't do something like that. I'll let you be, Em. I was just making sure everything was okay." Emily waited till he had gone back to his own house and went to take the decorations down again. She packed them into their boxes, bringing them inside as she put them in the coat closet. Let the kids look through the garage for them now. They wouldn't find anything, and maybe this would dissuade them from this little game. She wasn't sure why they had chosen her house for this anyway. Dad had been well loved by the kids in the neighborhood, and his house had been a mandatory stop for any kid looking for good candy. She thought again about calling the cops, but decided that hiding the decorations might be enough this time. She went back to sorting through the things, but she couldn't recapture the mood she'd left. She just kept going back to busybody Glenn and the dumb kids who couldn't leave well enough alone, and she just got madder and madder the longer it went on. She finally tossed an old blender into the box, shattering the attached pitcher and growling as she went to get her keys. She was going out. She wanted to be anywhere but here. She climbed into her SUV, and as she looked back, she did a double take, unable to believe what she'd seen. It was only for a second, but she'd seen something swinging from behind the curtains in that second. It had been a man-shaped thing, hanging by the neck, but as she scanned every inch of the thick curtains, she couldn't find anything that looked anything like a swinging body. Maybe what Glenn had told her had gotten into her head, Emily thought, trying to put it out of her mind as she pulled out of the driveway. She came back after dark, having spent time with some college friends as she vented about the situation. They all agreed that it sounded terrible and thought Emily should have called the cops after the first time. Emily hadn't hung out with her friends like this for a while. Usually she was on a time limit and spent the whole time looking at her watch. It was nice not to constantly worry about her dad, but that made her feel guilty all over again. As her lights fell across the yard, she could see the Halloween decorations once again spread across it. Emily came angrily out of her car, taking 3 or 4 steps for the door, when the light in the living room suddenly came on. Emily felt her legs wobble ominously then. Behind the thick curtains, the lights, looking soft and inviting, was the silhouette of a swinging body. She stood there for a full 60 seconds, watching it slowly swing to and fro, and when the outline of the head seemed to turn in her direction, she loosed a loud scream and backpedaled. Emily stumbled back to her car, her legs feeling only about half under her control, and she drove her car halfway down the street before she took out her phone and called the police. They told her they'd be there in a few minutes, but when they asked if she felt safe going back to her house, she told them that she didn't and wanted someone to meet her down the street. They said they would, and when a blue and white drove past her, another pulled up next to her to see if she was the caller. They questioned her about the break-in, but halfway through her statement, the officer radioed and told him to bring her home. "Is the residence secure?" the officer called, jotting some notes. "The residence is locked and shows no sign of entry. We need her to come let us in so we can search inside." "That's impossible," Emily breathed. I saw something hanging in the living room." The officer agreed to come back with her, and Emily tried not to hyperventilate as she drove home. Some of the neighbors had come out to see the show, and she could see Glenn peeking out of his window as she pulled back in and came shakily from her vehicle. The living room lights were off, and the house looked dark and brooding. Emily felt her eyes creeping to the window as she walked across the lawn. She opened the door with the key, letting the police go first as they searched the home. The house was just as she had left it. The living room was devoid of anything that could cast a shadow like that. Nothing was taken. No windows or doors were forced open. The only thing that had been moved were the decorations, and the police seemed disinterested in the whole thing. They left after searching the house, saying they would ask her neighbors if they'd seen anyone lurking around the home. As they pulled away, Emily stood in the yard and watched them go. She could feel the way her neighbors looked at her as they shuffled off to bed, and it felt like bees crawling on her skin. They thought she was making things up, playing it up for attention. But how could they think such a thing? She had cared for her dad for nearly a year, even sticking it out through the rough times. But it seemed that now, the real horror had started. As they all went inside, the lights came on behind her, and the shadow cast across her was dreadfully familiar. Emily walked back to the car, called her friend Nina, and asked if she could stay with her. She would come back later for her things, but for the moment, Emily just wanted to go anywhere but here. Emily put the last of her boxes in the car and took one last look at her childhood home. The Halloween decorations were still there, looking a little windblown and lame next to the new addition to the yard. The realtor had been very interested in getting her hands on the house and saw no reason why it shouldn't sell quickly. When Emily told her about her father's suicide, the realtor told her it wouldn't stop most buyers. You'd be surprised how many people want to live in a possibly haunted house. Thought of selling the house made her deeply sad, but she hadn't even been able to come back until the sign was there. Nina had offered to come back with her, but Emily had said this was something she had to do on her own. Nina had said that she could live with her until she sold the house, her having just lost her roommate. Emily was happy for the invitation and had gone to the house early in the morning to get her things. Most of it was still packed in boxes, but she wanted a few things of her dad's that she had chosen to keep. The painted ducks, the family photos, the other things from her dad's room. The rest could be sold with the house for all she cared. It would likely raise the value of the place anyway, but she would have just as easily cut the price if they didn't want it. She heard the leaves crunch from the fence line and looked up to see Glenn walking over. "I'm just getting my things and leaving," she said, closing the door and standing her ground. "Good," Glenn said, his usual fatherly tone gone. "I think that would be best." Yeah, Emily thought. His messages had made that pretty clear. Glenn had been another part of the reason she hadn't been back. He had called her the day after, wanting to know why the police had been there and why she had left that awful thing in the living room. He'd been patient with her, they all had, but that thing was in poor taste and downright disrespectful to her father. When she hadn't returned his calls, he called the next day and told her that he was going to use his key and take the thing down, and that her father would be ashamed of her. It seemed that the neighbors had turned on her too, and now she was a social pariah. Good for them, Emily thought. She was leaving, so they could think what they wanted of her. You planning on taking down the Halloween decorations before you go? I wouldn't want any of the local kids to accidentally wander over to your house expecting candy. She knew what he was referring to, but she didn't bite. I paid the realtor extra to stage the house. I'm not coming back. Glenn nodded, clearly unhappy, as he turned to leave. Emily let him go, looking back at the house for a final time before leaving as well. Despite the hour, she could still see the slight outline that would haunt her dreams from behind those thick curtains that had graced the window since she was young. She'd been in the living room many times, trying to find anything that could have explained the shadow cast there, but there was nothing. It was as if that moment was frozen just behind the curtain, and if Emily could get beyond it, maybe she could save her dad before he took himself out of the disease's path. The realtor pulled in as Emily was looking at the house, smiling and waving as she told Emily the good news. I've got 3 interested parties already. They love the neighborhood and can't wait to see the property. Looks like you might be shed of this place sooner than expected. Emily told her that sounded great. As she climbed behind the wheel, she watched as the realtor picked up the Halloween decorations and hastily tucked them under her arm. The for sale sign seemed to wave goodbye as she pulled out of the driveway for the final time. As she watched her clean up, Emily wondered how many times she would clean up those same decorations before finally leaving it up as a lost cause. She wondered how many times the neighbors would call her to complain about the decoration that she couldn't touch before she finally lost her mind. It seemed her dad's final legacy would be what swung beyond the veil, no matter what the neighbors thought. It seems this cozy horror has ghosts and ghouls aplenty, so let's hear a story about some trick-or-treaters who never quite took off their costume. Let's hear a tale about Halloween haunts. It was my first Halloween on Hambry Street, and I was raring to go. I had just moved to the neighborhood the week before, and I was hoping to meet some of the kids on the street as I filled my bag with treats. Mom hadn't set out to move this close to Halloween, but when your dad decides he needs his house for his mistress and her kids, you have to pick up and go pretty quickly. The court had made him buy Mom out of her half of the house, but that wasn't too difficult for him. We'd found a very nice house on Hambry Street, a street packed with families and little crackerbox houses, but unpacking hadn't left a lot of time to make friends. Now, standing on the front stoop in my homemade ghost costume, I was ready to find some friends. The costume had been last minute. My mom had honestly forgotten about it in the move, and when I had reminded her an hour ago, she had realized that there was no time to buy one. Hunting around, she found some old sheets and cut a couple of eye holes in one to make a classic ghost costume. It looked kind of lame next to the superheroes and cartoon characters that were tromping up and down the street, but I liked it. It reminded me of Charlie Brown from the storybook I had on my bookcase, and as I set out, I wondered if someone might actually give me a rock. I didn't get a rock, but I did get a lot of looks from those around me. I had expected some laughs, maybe some questions about why I didn't have a real costume, but what I got was something between fear and scorn. People stepped out of my way. The adults looked down at me with disbelief, and a lot of the kids looked scared. I had to look at the front of the sheet a couple of times to make sure they weren't stained or something. No one wanted to talk to me. Most of the kids turned away from me, and the people at the houses refused to give me candy. They slammed the door in my face almost immediately, some of them telling me that I should be ashamed of myself before doing it. That's how I came to be sitting on the sidewalk, trying not to cry and wondering why I had bothered to come out at all. I'd met no one, I had made 0 friends, and I felt like I should have just gone home an hour ago. So when the group of other kids in ghost costumes walked down the street, they were pretty easy to spot. There were 5 of them, their ghost costumes looking dirty and ragged, and as they walked like a line of spooky ducklings, the crowd parted for them as well. They didn't stop at any of the houses, they didn't speak to anyone, they just kept making their way up the street like an arrow fired from a bow. I felt drawn to follow them for some reason, and to this day I can't say why. Maybe I felt some kind of kinship, maybe it was the way people treated them, but regardless, I got up and ran to catch them, my shoes slapping on the concrete as I went. The other kids watched me go with genuine concern, but I didn't much care. These kids seemed to have made the same mistake I had, and it seemed like it was better to be an outcast as a group than alone. "Hey, wait up!" I called, the 5 ghosts utterly ignoring me as they went along. We walked in our now 6-ghost line, and I began attempting to make conversation with them. They looked to be about my age, or at least my height, and they all carried brightly colored candy bags that were in the same sorry state as their costumes. They were mud-spattered, ripped in places, and the kid in front had shoes with the soles nearly coming off. His left sole slapped on the pavement, going whap, 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 and I wondered what sort of costumes these were. Were they some kind of zombie ghosts or something? Next to my clean white sheet, they looked downright grimy, and I wondered why their parents had let them leave the house like this. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, all of them leaving my neighborhood as we turned a corner and headed into a less crowded street. I promised my mom I wouldn't go too far, and I don't know the streets real well. They ignored me, but I wouldn't have long to wonder. I had seen the house before. Mom and I stared at it as we'd driven into town. It stood out, the grass long, the fence ragged, but the house was the centerpiece of the unkempt space. It had probably once been a very nice one-story house, but it looked like someone had pelted it with eggs or dirt, or both, and the owner just hadn't bothered to clean it off. The windows were boarded up, the shingles hung raggedly from the roof, and someone had spray-painted "Killer" across the garage door in big red letters. It was impossible not to notice, and I realized too late that this was our destination. Are we trick-or-treating here? I don't even think anyone lives here. They didn't say anything, but I realized I was wrong a few minutes later. I could see a light peeking from a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, and as the ghosts arrived on the sidewalk, it was suddenly covered by a shadow. The ghosts did not approach the house. They didn't even come off the sidewalk. They just stood there, bags in hand, and stared at the house. The shadow moved away from the opening a few times, but it always came back in short order. It was a fitful thing, moving away only to come back quicker and quicker to check that the ghosts were still there. I kept turning to look at them, asking what we were doing, and receiving no answer. The ghost kids just stood and stared, boring into the house with their dark circle eyes, and I think that was when I really got a good look at them. Their sheets weren't just grimy. They were covered in mud tracks. Some of the stains looked like they could be blood, but the worst was the bare stretch of leg beneath the sheets. The skin on those legs was cut and bleeding, purple and bruised, and the arms were in a similar state of abuse. The eyes, though, the eyes were the worst. Looking out from the open holes were dark eyes that were purple with rings. The kids looked like they had gone 10 rounds with a professional boxer, and the part that usually had color was pitch black and unblinking. These kids weren't interested in candy. They were out for something else. I had opened my mouth to ask them why we were just standing here, when the door suddenly opened, and a man in dirty, sweat-stained clothes came weaving out. He wore sweatpants and a tank top, and his bare feet looked like he had bumped them enough times to break every toe on them. He was thin to the point of being skeletal, and the clothes hung off him like rags. I had worried at first that he might be drunk, weaving and pivoting across the yard, but the closer he got, the more I understood that he was stone sober. He wasn't stumbling. He was afraid, and it took everything he had to approach the ghost kids. "What do you want?" he stammered, his foot catching on something in the tall grass. "Why do you torment me?" The grass was so tall that you could hear the dry husks scraping against his pants. But if it bothered him, or the 5 other little ghosts, it never showed. "Haven't I suffered enough? The town won't let me forget. My ex-wife won't let me forget. And now you return every Halloween to remind me of my mistake. Why? Why? Just leave me alone. Haven't I suffered enough?" He stumbled again, his foot catching hard this time, and when he bumped into me, he barely missed knocking me down. That's when he seemed to realize that I was something else. He looked at me in disbelief, but it quickly turned to rage. He lunged forward, grabbing me and shaking me as I tried to articulate something, anything, that would make him stop. He was hurting me, my head snapping back and forth as he shook, and I couldn't make a sound as he tried to shake me to death. You aren't one of them. There were only 5 of them. There's always been 5 of them. Why are you here? Why are you tormenting me? Why are you..." Something hit him in the face, and he fell back into the grass and clutched his cheek. Something wet and sticky rolled down his neck, and I had a moment of fear as I wondered if it might be his eye. It wasn't. I saw that when he pulled his hand away. But when the second one hit him, I saw it was an egg, as a third and a fourth joined it. "Get off him, you killer! Haven't you killed enough kids already?" I turned to see 3 kids on the opposite sidewalk, a carton of eggs between their feet, and their hands already throwing more. The man scuttled backwards, shielding his face as he went and disappeared into the grass, more eggs pelting in on him. I heard the crunch of old weeds that was followed by the slam of a door, and when I heard sneakers coming up towards me, I put a hand up in case the eggs came flying my way. "You okay, kid?" I looked up to find a Power Ranger, the red one, extending a hand to help me up. That was Ryan, someone who would later become my best friend over the next few days. Yeah, I said, accepting the hand up. I looked over at where the other ghosts had been, but they were all gone. I suppose they had gotten what they came for. "Whoa, let me help you with that," he said, taking the sheet off and folding it a little as he draped it around me. After a few minutes of fussing with it, his friends coming over to help, he had made a halfway decent toga out of it. His friends, soon to be my friends too, Rob and Patrick agreed that it looked a lot better, though it clashed with their Power Ranger costumes badly. "You're that kid that just moved in on Hamby, right?" Ryan asked. "I'm Ryan. This is Patrick and Robert." "Just Rob," he insisted as he waved. They invited me to come with them, chucking another dozen or so eggs at the house that the man had scuttled back into. They didn't seem angry about it. They did it like it was an expected chore, and almost seemed bored. They left the trash in the yard before picking up their bikes and walking back the way I'd come, towards the happy sound of our active street. Why did you guys throw eggs at that house anyway?" I asked, the four of us passing more kids on their way with eggs. Did he do something to you?" I had expected them to laugh or maybe act proud of what they had done, but they just shrugged. It was a look you sometimes saw on people who were voting or going about volunteer work, bored but certain of their actions, and it was something that was hard to make sense of at the age of 10. "We egg his house every year. Everybody does. No one likes Horace Jenkins, but especially not on Halloween." "Why?" I asked, still confused. "Same reason I bet no one has given you candy. No one wears ghost costumes either. Not after what he did." "But what did he do?" I said, starting to get aggravated. Ryan turned like he was going to yell at me for being stupid, but seemed to remember that I was new. "It was probably about 15 years ago, way before we were born. Horace Jenkins was the owner of some company, something that was doing well around here, but it didn't make people like him. Horace Jenkins, from what my dad says, was a mean man. He didn't treat people right. He was rude. He didn't support the community. But he was rich, so people let him stay. On Halloween night, about 15 years ago, he was coming home drunk from some party he'd been at with his rich friends, and he ran over 5 kids in ghost costumes. It was all over the news. People knew he did it, but he got some hotshot lawyer who got him out of jail time. They claimed the kids had been running across the road. They claimed Horace hadn't actually been drunk, and they cast a lot of doubt and made a lot of deals. At least that's what Dad said. Afterwards, Horace tried to pay the families off, but they wouldn't take his money. No one in town would take his money. No one would work for his company. And he lost all his money when his wife left him. She took the house, his cars, his kids, and he was left with that little house and not much else. The people here let him live in that house, but they let him know that we haven't forgotten. After the incident, it was considered kind of disrespectful to wear ghost costumes anymore. That's why no one does it. They didn't know you were the new kid on the block. They just thought you were being mean. Now you know better. Eh, Caesar? Caesar became my nickname after that, and my makeshift toga got me a lot of candy before the streetlights went out. I spent some time afterward trading candy with my new friends and promising to see them at school the next day. I still live in that town, some 20 years later, and it's still considered a tradition to go egg Horace Jenkins' house. He's still alive, an old codger of 79, and I've realized that the town keeps him around as a warning. Working for the bank, I've come to find out that Horace Jenkins has no money, no assets, not a penny to his name, but his taxes are paid, his power and water bills paid, and food is left on his doorstep once a week to sustain him. It's nothing gourmet. The basics are good enough for him, but it keeps him alive and living in a house that is slowly rotting around him. Once a year, someone cuts the grass. Once a year, someone spray paints killer on his garage door. Once a year, we all throw eggs and dirt clods at his house to remind him that he tried to cheat his way out of 5 lives. The law may have exonerated him, but the town does not forget, and it doesn't forgive. Sometimes, while my friends and I throw our eggs at the sagging wreck, I think I see 5 little ghosts on the sidewalk, staring at the house of the man who murdered them. Sometimes, while I throw my eggs at that temple of hatred, I wish Horace Jenkins would live 1,000 years. Then I remember those ghost kids will be waiting for him, and that brings me some comfort.
One more story for you, and it involves everyone's favorite creepy critter who hides in the cornfield just waiting for those who are worthy. When some kids try to monopolize on this legend, however, they may find that they're biting off more than they can chew. So let's hear a tale about what waits amongst the corn.
Hey, you live at the Murphy farm, right? I looked up, not sure I had heard them. No one had ever actually talked to me before, so it was a little weird to have it happen. I'm a farm kid. My dad is called Farmer Murphy, though that's not actually our name. He bought the Murphy farm, the 120 acres of farmland containing 2 cow barns, a large chicken shed, an orchard, and several fish ponds. Dad made quite a lot of money working the farm, enough to afford a small army of farm hands, and we've run about 3 pumpkin patches already this year. With that kind of money, Dad thought it would be fitting to send me to a private school. Maybe he thought I could get some good education that would allow me to be more than a farmer. Maybe he thought I would have a head for business and take the farm to new heights. But whatever he had hoped, it didn't leave me a lot of room for making friends. I'm not an unpersonable guy. I don't keep to myself or bully anyone. But the kids at the private school know that my dad is a farmer. They can smell the cow crap on my boots, and they can see me work the pumpkin patch when they come to get their jack-o'-lanterns. They laugh at me behind my back. They call me Jethro and think I must be dumb and simple. This leads most of them to shun me or ignore me, and that's about how I've spent the last 2 months since we moved here. Until now, it seems. Yeah, I said, looking up from my notebook. Told you, said a blonde girl. I thought her name was Rose or Lily or something like that. But the kid who had asked me if I lived at Murphy Farm was Derek. Derek was the one who had called me Abner and pretended to smell crap on my boots, even when they were clean. Well, hey, we were wondering if we could see it. You know, we're real interested in farming, aren't we, guys? There were 5 of them, 2 girls and 3 boys, and they were smiling way too big. Derek was part of the student council. The girl, who was either Lily or Rose, and the other girl, Helen maybe, were cheerleaders. The other 2 were Stan and Guthrie, guys on the football team and pseudo-bullies. They had certainly bullied me, though not physically. I was a big guy, too much time spent bucking hay and digging with a hoe, but they didn't mind picking on me. This was the most genial conversation we had ever had, actually. Since when? I asked, looking between the 5 of them distrustfully. Derek sighed as his smile slipped a little. Okay. We really just need someone to say it's okay for us to be there at dusk. We want to do the Corn Man Challenge, and your dad has the only cornfield in about 30 miles. It was my turn to roll my eyes. You know that's fake, right? There's no real corn man. Well, duh, Guthrie said. We aren't babies. We just want to do it for TikTok. They've been going viral lately, and we want to see if ours will, too. I didn't really do TikTok much. I was usually listening to audiobooks or something on my phone if I was working in the field, but even I had heard about this one. The Corn Man was an old legend that had blown up recently. The kids were making videos in fields of themselves, standing as still as scarecrows while they sang the creepy little song that summoned him. He never came, of course, but some of them were supposed to be kind of spooky. The legend said that if you could prove to the Corn Man that you could stand still in the face of his horrible visage, then he had to grant you a wish. But it was all superstitious nonsense. You might as well ask the milk cow for wishes than some corn man. Even so, though, I supposed maybe I could work this to my advantage. I don't know, I said, putting on the hokey accent I sometimes used. I'd have to run the tractor when you get done, so there wouldn't be any footprints in the corn. Tractor gas is a little expensive. I pretended to think about it. I could run it for, maybe $15 a head. They had their phones out before I even finished, asking for my Cash App ID so they could send me the money. I'm not as stupid as they think, and of course, I had Cash App. I'd had my eye on a couple of new games, and $75 would get me a long way towards them. I nodded as the money was received, Derek actually labeling it tractor gas, and I told them that I would meet them on the edge of the east field at 5:30 that afternoon. The sun'll just be setting, so it'll give you time to set up before it gets too low. They agreed, and as they went away, chattering quietly, I sent out another text, preparing for this evening. I met them at 5:35 that afternoon by the east field, surprised that they had known which one to come to. Sometimes city people got turned around. Come on, I said, disappearing into the corn. It isn't far. Derek told me to hang on, the girls complaining that they didn't know they would have to wander through the corn. I didn't. I just made my way to the spot near the left edge of the field and took a seat on a big rock. The spot was a little weird. No matter what Dad did to it, nothing would grow there. The rock was there to mark it, and as they came out of the corn and saw the little 15 by 15 area, they started squawking about how it was perfect. One of the girls had a tripod. Her Cash App ID said Lily Rose, so maybe I had been right on both parts. And they set up a phone as they tried to get the right angle. I just sat on the rock and watched them, looking at the sun as it rode lower and waiting for them to begin. Okay, Derek said, let's all join hands and get started. The other girl, turned out her name was Heather, pressed a little button in her hand, and they began. Corn man, come to me if you can. Corn man, I can stand as the corn stalks stand. Corn man, still as a stone, not like a man. Corn man, still and quiet as the corn stalks can. They chanted the words, then they stood stock still in the cornfield. The plants waved, giving no notice to the 5 high school kids who stood like statues in their midst. It was silly. Cornstalks didn't stand still at all. Whoever had come up with this story had clearly never spent a lot of time around corn. Nothing's happening, Helen whispered. Give it a minute, Derek whispered back. How long does it take? Stan whispered. But before Derek could answer, they heard a rustling sound in the cornfield. I lay on my rock, staying still and listening to the rustle of something moving amidst the corn plants. Is that him? Lily Rose asked. Shh, you're supposed to be still, Derek hissed. They stayed there as the sun set, stalks rustling like insects around them, and suddenly it stepped from the corn like a phantom. He was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, and he was a mass of burlap sacks and chains. He had an axe in one hand and a cleaver in the other, and the hockey mask over his face made him look grisly indeed. His boots galumphed with crusty mud, and he swung his head from one side to the other as he took in the kids standing in the field. It's the corn man, Derek shouted, immediately breaking his advice from a moment ago and staggering back a step. You said he wasn't real, Heather gibbered, breaking into a run. I didn't. But whatever Derek did or didn't know was lost as the corn man bellowed like a bull and charged them. They all broke and ran, the corn shaking as they slammed into it and ran in the direction that they had come. No one stayed to get their wish. No one remembered why they had come there. And as someone grabbed the camera, they knocked the tripod over and did not come back for it. They were yelling and screaming all the way to their car, none of them giving a care for their guide, but I didn't mind. The corn man swung his head in my direction as I began to laugh, and as he staggered toward me, I clapped my hands slowly. "Great job, Travis. You're getting pretty good at this." He lifted the mask, smiling as he held his burlap-covered hand out to me. "It's pretty fun to watch them city kids pee their pants and run away." I slapped a 10 spot in his hand, and we headed for the house as Mom rang the bell from the back door. After 2 months of being made fun of and thought of as the stupid farm kid, it's pretty nice to get to watch them get their comeuppance. We stomped through the corn, the stalks parting easily, and Travis looked at the setting sun unhappily. "Hey, cuz, you ain't scared the real corn man will get us for making fun of him, are ya? Travis, don't tell me you actually believe in the corn man. He's just a story. He isn't real." "Nuh-uh. My daddy says," "Travis, your daddy is a drunk who claims he met Bigfoot in Branson, Missouri. He's far from a reliable source." "But he says he believes in him, and that means he has to be real, right?" It was hard to believe sometimes that Travis was a year older than I was. Travis was 17 and huge for his age. The local high schools were trying to get him to play football for them, same as they did every year. But Travis and Uncle Zeke were our best hands, and Dad really couldn't spare Travis so he could toss a ball around. Zeke depended on his son's added pay so he could properly pickle himself too, so he didn't push the matter. "Travis, don't believe everything your old man says. Sometimes you have to come up with your own ideas about things, you know?" Travis chewed that over as we came into the barn, leaving his costume in the barn before we went in for dinner. Okay, so my earlier comments may have been a little disingenuous. I didn't lie. I've always been the big, supposedly dumb farm kid for the 2 months that I've been at this private school Dad sent me to. But just here recently, I've become more approachable by my peers. Derek and his friends are about the 4th group that's paid for the pleasure of having the shit scared out of them in my dad's cornfield, and I expected they wouldn't be the last. The first group that had approached me had been pure coincidence. Travis had come whistling through the fields as they stood stock still, and they had bolted in fear before he'd even come out of the corn. After that, I'd cut him in, put together a costume, and he blundered into every corn man summoning from then on. It's not technically a lie. People pay more than I charge for haunted houses, and I've certainly been cashing in given the time of year. People expect a scare around Halloween. They crave it, and I'm just giving them what they want. I think deep down they know there's no corn man, but it's the adrenaline rush that draws them in. I'm just providing the ambience. Derek's video went up the next day and did very well. He even tagged Murphy Farm in it, which was nice. He seemed surprised when I was in class the next day, and I had to explain to him that I had stayed still like you were supposed to do, and the corn man had gone away. That seemed to work, and he nodded as he thought about it. I went back to my assignment as the rest of the class joked about Derek and his run-in with the legendary corn man. I got approached by a new group at lunch, 4 guys from the football team, who wanted to go see this corn man too. I told them I would need to run the stalk lifter, something that ran on diesel and was kind of pricey, and they shelled out $20 a head for the privilege of using the field. I laughed to myself, $80 the richer, and when a new shadow fell over my lunch, I looked up to find the last person I had expected. "Hey, I heard you can summon the corn man. I was hoping I could tag along." Marjorie Stokes was not someone I would have thought would fall for all this corn man nonsense. Marjorie was here on an academic scholarship, one of about 5 given every year, and her grades reflected. Like me, however, she wasn't from the usual student background, and the others picked on her. We weren't friends. I don't know as we'd ever shared so much as a class together, but I did know of her. "Yeah," I said. "Why? Do you want to set up a time?" I was hoping I could just tag along with those guys from earlier. I want to see what there is to this corn man thing." Well, it's generally $20 a head, but I'm mostly just gouging those guys. For you, I'd do 10. Just don't tell anybody. She nodded, reaching into her purse and pulling out a 20. I can pay. Where and when do I meet you? I slid the 20 into my pocket, respecting her desire for fairness. 6, by the East Field. It's the one with all the corn in it. You can't miss it. She told me she would be there, and walked quickly off so she could get her own lunch. I shot a text to Travis, telling him we had more people looking for the corn man, and he said he'd be ready. I smiled as I chewed, happy that business was booming, and reflected that it would kind of suck to go back to being the big dumb farm kid again once Halloween was over. It would suck, but I wouldn't mind returning to being a nobody either. Having a full social calendar was kind of a pain, and it was only a matter of time before Dad noticed that I was doing something out in the field and put a stop to it. Till then, though, let there be corn man. The sun was sinking below the corn as a little red hatchback pulled up along the fence line, and I saw Marjorie hop out and adjust her cardigan. "Am I late?" she asked, not seeing anybody. About that time, I heard the exhaust of a large F-250 as it came into view, and I shook my head. "Nope, looks like you're early." The 4 burly football players piled out, giving Marjorie a questioning side-eye, and I told them to follow me as we headed into the corn. They came along noisily, talking and joking as they pushed the corn aside, and when the 5 of them had come into the field, the biggest one turned and tossed me his phone. "You got the recording, right?" I nodded and lined up the shot, the 4 of them laughing as Marjorie came to join them. They were all very cavalier about the whole thing, but I noticed that Marjorie was almost shaking with anticipation. She was quiet, almost stoic, and as they took their positions, she seemed ready to fight to get what she wanted. I lined up the shot, telling them to start when they wanted, and the 5 of them began to chant as the corn swallowed the last line of the setting sun behind the stalks. "Corn man, come to me if you can. Corn man, I can stand as the corn stalks stand. Corn man, still as a stone, not like a man. Corn man, still and quiet as the corn stalks can." The ritual complete, they stood there like statues as they waited for the coming of the corn man. I sat too, holding the phone as I recorded them, and the glowing remains of the sun behind them looked pretty cool. This would definitely make a great video. I hope they remembered to tag the farm in it, but as I sat there watching them twitch and glance around, something felt different this time. The crickets were silent, the night birds had gone still, and I was suddenly aware of how absolutely noiseless the world had become. It's rare to be in a field at night and hear nothing, and it made me think of something Dad had told me on a hunting trip once. When the birds and bugs go quiet, it usually means something big is around, something big and something bad. I breathed a sigh of relief when the corn began to rustle. There he was, I thought, as the stalks shook and the assembled kids began to shudder. He was later than usual, but the big oaf sometimes forgot that he was supposed to be here. Travis could be flaky, but I was glad he hadn't forgot our arrangement. When the thing broke free of the corn, I knew in an instant that it wasn't Travis. This thing was made of corn stalks and roots. Its arms were wound together plant fibers, and its legs were thick and muscled with the bulging veins of vegetation. Its face looked like a pagan idol, the features made of delicate silk and weathered corn stalks, and the eyes blazed at the assembled children like the coals of a fire. "Holy shit! What the fuck is that?" one of them shouted, and the thing turned its head to look at him about a second before one of those arms came up and wrapped itself around him. I heard his bones break, his skin tear, and his final horrified screams were cut off as he was torn to pieces. The others ran then, the 3 football players sprinting into the corn, but I was frozen to the spot on top of my rock. I watched as it went after them, my eyes locked on the bloody remains of the kid whose name I had never bothered to learn, and from the rock I heard the thing as it caught them. They screamed like trapped animals, their fear and their pain a living thing. But as I looked up, I noticed that someone hadn't run. Margaret was still there, her cardigan splattered in blood and her face full of terror, but she refused to move. She was stock still, her chest barely rising, and when I glanced down, I remembered that I was still recording. The kid's phone had caught all of it, and as the thing came stomping back, I tried to keep everything in frame so I could prove that I'd had no part in this. At least one person had been torn to shreds on my dad's land, and I was not about to go to prison for some psycho that had been hiding in the east field. As it came lumbering out of the field, it looked at Margaret and made its laborious way over to her. To her credit, she never moved, though I could see the tears sliding down her face as they joined the gore there. It stood far taller than it had any right to be, its body blocking the light of the moon as it fell across her. It seemed to judge her with those living coal eyes. "Ye have proven thyself worthy of my boon, child. What do you ask of the corn man?" Her voice shook only a little, but I still heard it from my rock. "Please, my mother has cancer. Cure her, I beg you. She's all I have in this world. Please, take her cancer from her and let her live." The corn man nodded his head slowly, and it sounded like trees bending in the wind. "Granted," he whispered, and as he disappeared into the cornfield, I could see the red running off him and hear the creak of the stalks as he vanished. The police found the bodies of Trevor Parks, Nathaniel Moore, Gabriel, and Michael Roos in the field that night. Dad was pretty mad when he learned what I'd been doing, but the video cleared me of any involvement in the deaths. Travis had thankfully been busy in the cowshed with a particularly fussy milk cow, and had remembered that he was supposed to be the corn man about 10 minutes after sunset. He had actually met Margaret and I as we came out of the field, and I had to stop her from screaming as he came lumbering up in about half his costume. The police took the phone, and the official report stated that some psycho had been creeping around, found us in the field, and decided to kill everyone but Margaret and I for some reason. Dad forbade me from doing anything like that in the field again, and I agreed, pretty done with anything related to the corn man after that. A couple of days later, after I'd been asked about 1,000 questions by the police, Margaret came to sit with me at lunch. "Thank you," she said, and I was a little confused as to what she was thanking me for. "For? My mom got the call today. They have to run a bunch of new tests, but the cancer's gone. She had a tumor in her brain about the size of my thumb, and it's just gone." We sat in silence after that, neither of us saying it, but both of us thinking the same thing. It would appear that Margaret had gotten her wish from the corn man after all.
And just like that, our stories are at an end once again. Oh, but don't pull a long face. There'll be more Halloween fun in store tomorrow on another Halloween Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky Halloween season.